Hello friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time, and I'm finally here to show you how I make those iced pumpkin cookies. Now first off, I did get the original written recipe from allrecipes.com, and so I just copied it off, printed it out, and so this is my base recipe. But I'll be showing you some of the changes that I make. I will go ahead and link to this written recipe down below if you're interested in it. But I'm going to show you some of the little tweaks I make just to make them a little bit more healthy and to add my own special touch. So let's get busy on these cookies. And besides, who says it has to be fall to have pumpkin cookies? So especially if you're like me and you have a lot of pumpkin put up from previous years of growing pumpkin, I've got lots. Right here I have some thawed out in a little pan. So this is what I'm going to be using because I do like to freeze my pumpkin after I puree it. Okay, so first we're going to start off with the dry ingredients. So the original recipe is 2.5 cups of white flour. I'm going to be using a cup of freshly milled whole wheat flour. This is mostly spelt and hard white wheat. Okay, and then I'm going to be using 1 cup of unbleached white flour. And then for the last half cup, I'm going to be using my own homemade nut flour. This is just a mix of nuts. I have a video on how I make the nut flour and talk a little bit about some of the various things I use it in. It also adds a richer flavor to the cookies when I do that. Okay, so next we're going to put in about a teaspoon, well not about, it should be a teaspoon, but I always measure by hand, a teaspoon of baking soda. Got some clumps in there. Make sure you want to break those up. That looks a little heavy for a teaspoon. There we go. And a teaspoon of baking powder. So this little cup right here is about a teaspoon and a half. So we're going to back that off a little bit. A half teaspoon of salt. A half teaspoon of ground cloves. And if you're like me, you might want to go just a little heavy because you like lots of flavor. 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. And I'm going to go heavy, so it's going to be at least a tablespoon. Then a half teaspoon of nutmeg. And so I get whole nutmeg and then I grate it. And I don't really measure it out. I just grate it until it looks like I got about that much in there. So there's our dry ingredients there. Let me just stir those around a little bit. Okay, so next we're going to go on to the wet ingredients. So we have 2 sticks of butter, so that should be a half cup of butter altogether, or 8 ounces. Okay, and to that I'm going to add 1 whole egg, and we're going to put in the sugars now. So what I do, the recipe calls for 1.5 cups of sugar total. So what I'm going to do is use 1 cup of organic cane sugar. Maybe actually a little less than a cup, just a shy cup of the cane sugar, and then a half cup of coconut sugar. Coconut sugar is a lot less sweet than your cane sugar, so it'll be like getting less sugar anyway, and plus you're getting the added minerals that are in that coconut sugar, so that makes it a little bit more healthy that way. Now this is just going off the sugar content of the recipe. You can cut that back by another half cup. And then we're going to add to that a teaspoon of the homemade vanilla extract, and we need 1 cup of the pumpkin puree. And since it's kind of separated a little bit as it was thawing out, we'll mix it in. And let's measure out a cup here. And yes, I'm doing this right over the bowl because I don't care if I get a little extra in here. I want to make sure your butter is softened. So I took mine out of the refrigerator yesterday so it'd have plenty of time to soften up really well. And I'm just going to break this up with my fork. Normally I would grab the salad fork to do this with because it's bigger, but since I already got this one out and is dirty already from the pumpkin, I'll use that. Then what you're going to want to do is use your mixer and then just process this just to kind of cream everything together. Almost forgot to say, preheat your oven to 350 degrees. Get that started now if you haven't already. Now most people actually cream their sugar and butter together before adding the egg and all that. I usually just put everything in one thing. Yes, it makes it a little lumpy like this, but then what I do is I add my flour and sugar mixture in a little bit at a time, like so. And then just keep processing it like that. Okay, and then once that gets to where you can't even move it anymore, then take your spoon or your fork and just finish blending it in there. And this dough, even though I sometimes like to get my hands into the cookie dough to mix it better, this dough is actually wet enough that it's not really necessary to do that. Okay, and just get it blended in good. It's okay if you got little chunks of butter, they'll melt and bake in there just fine. Okay, then just take your mixture there, and you're just going to spoon it on there. Doesn't have to be perfect. You do want to spread this out, you know, leave fairly decent gaps there. So I'm putting about a tablespoon. There we go. Using a little silicone spatula makes it easier. Or you can use 2 spoons or a spoon and a knife. And of course, depending on the size of the cookies you make, this will probably make up to 2 dozen. I usually make them probably a little on the larger side. And I'm using the stoneware cookie sheets for these. It's possible you may want to, if you're using another type of cookie sheet, you may need to grease it. Well, there's my beep. That means the oven's hot. So I'm going to go ahead and put these in for a minimum of 15 minutes and up to 20 minutes. So I like to check them at the minimal time frame to see how they look. So I'm going to set my timer for 15 minutes. So while those are baking, I'm going to go ahead and get the icing going for the cookies. So what we're going to start with is about 2 cups of powdered sugar. So what I have here, I have homemade powdered sugar. This one is actually a blend of cane sugar, or it might be all coconut sugar. There should be at least a cup in there. Okay, and that is all coconut sugar, I can tell, because it isn't quite as, doesn't powder up as nicely as your cane sugar. But again, this will make it a little bit more healthy, and you can get some more of those minerals in there. Then we'll add a cup of just a regular homemade white organic powdered sugar. And if you're interested in how to make your own powdered sugar, it's super easy. I'll go ahead and link to the video in the description box down below. Don't forget to hit show more or that little gray arrow. Okay, so now we're going to take a fork and blend those 2 together real well. Instead of putting in a whole bunch of milk, I like to use some of the pumpkin puree in there so I can get some more of that pumpkin into the icing itself. So I just put in about 2 tablespoons of that, and then we'll go ahead and put a teaspoon of vanilla. Of course, we have to remember powdered sugar always gets smaller once you start adding your wet ingredients to it. Okay, so I have about a tablespoon of butter, melted butter here, so I'm going to add that in. And you do want your icing to be a little runny so you can drizzle it over your cookies. And as this sits, it is going to get a little bit thicker. So that's a good thickness right there. So I didn't even add any milk to this. I'm just going off the pumpkin, the butter, and the vanilla extract. But you can use milk instead of using the pumpkin puree if you prefer. So now all we got to do is wait for the cookies to come out, and then I'm going to put them on my cooling rack, and then we'll put some icing on them. Well, right after my first batch of cookies got done, the public power went out, so I'm going to have to finish baking them later, or just put them on smaller pans and bake them in my toaster oven hooked up to our solar power. So everything you see on right now is all running on solar, because this is why we have it. We have power outages all the time here, and there's no storm, so I have no idea what's going on. But thankfully I got one batch done. So what I have right here is the dehydrator rack that Patrick built for me out of old bed rails. I actually have 2 that I use, and I keep in by the wood stove, and sometimes I'll take this one and put it on top of the wood stove for drying certain things, or I just keep them stacked on top of each other right next to the wood stove. But this also makes a great cookie cooling rack, and so I can put up to 4 layers of cookies on here. So these we bought at our local store, and I don't know where else you can find these exact ones. I keep telling people they're not actually cooling racks. These are very much finer mesh, and they're made for making jerky is what they're made for. So Patrick built the rack to fit these particular stainless steel racks here. So he built the holder, that is. So anyway, it really makes for a great place to also cool my cookies and to add the icing to. So I usually end up with about 3 layers of the cookies And my light is acting funny only because it's acting funny. It's been doing that for a while. Has nothing to do with the power. Our solar power, thankfully, we've got plenty right now. Refrigerator, it's nice and sunny. Fridge, everything else is running on solar power. We just don't have my conventional oven hooked up to solar. So you can see I'm just putting dollops on there like that. You can also make it runnier and then just drizzle it this way. So I like to make mine a little bit thicker for this and just kind of and put it on like that. It'll drip down and probably run through the rack, and that's okay. And so then what I do is I take this one, I move it down to the bottom, and then I'll put the next rack on. It's easier for me to ice these down on one of these two levels than to do it up here. This is what makes this kind of rack really nice, because I can use it in for so many different things. So if you're interested in how Patrick made this, he does have a video out on it that I'll go ahead and link to down below in the description box. Don't forget to hit show more or that little gray arrow like I said before. So then again, I'll put the next batch here and then on, and then just ice the cookies that way. And there we go. I'll go ahead and put a picture here of what these look like with a bunch of them all sitting there on the rack drying, and a couple of more pictures of what the cookies look like when they're all done. And these are a nice, soft, tasty, wonderful cookie. They are probably my favorites right now, and I love the fact that I can make them from my own homegrown pumpkin. So if you've got pumpkin put away, don't wait for fall, Thanksgiving, or whatever to make those cookies. Do it now. Enjoy it while you got it. And besides, now's the best time to do it. You've got the stuff in storage, and you know, if you've been like us and you've been listening to us and you've been stocking up on your grains and your flours and your sugars and growing that garden and putting stuff away, you should have everything you need, just like I did here, to make these cookies without needing to go to the store. Okay, hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. Take care, and God bless.